have a problem. Right, so here's my problem. And it's a problem that a lot of bookworms have. At some point, your to-read list just gets ridiculously long. So long that it seems impossible to get through. So I've come up with a summer reading list for myself to try to tackle some of these books on my list. This is only some of them. So the book that has been on my list the longest is this one right here, Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro. As children, Kathy, Ruth, and Tommy were students at Hailsham, an exclusive boarding school secluded in the English countryside. It was a place of mercurial cliques and mysterious rules, and teachers were constantly reminding their charges of how special they were. Suspenseful, moving, beautifully atmospheric, Never Let Me Go is another classic by the author of The Remains of the Day. So this book has been on my list for a very long time, for years, since I saw the film in college. It stars Keira Knightley, Andrew Garfield, and I believe Carey Mulligan. But I just remember loving the story and because there was like this crazy plot point in the movie about why they're so special. Was not expecting that. But also it's just, there was a lot of tension with the characters and their relationships to each other. I remember the film being very moody and atmospheric, kind of like what this says. Everyone was wearing cozy sweaters. Also, this author won the Nobel Prize in Literature. He also wrote Remains of the Day, which was another great film that I really enjoyed with Anthony Hopkins and Emma Thompson. So I'm excited to read this book. Here's another one that's been on my list for a long time. 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. I know this is a classic and it's been on my radar for a very long time. I just never got around to reading it. I just picked this one up at the thrift store, so now I have my own copy, so no excuse. I know this author is famous for using magical realism in his work, and I love magical realism. It's probably one of my favorite genres of books to read. He's a Colombian, and he was also awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature. What I know about this book is that it chronicles the loves and lives of a family over a long period of time, over several years. And I just adore epic family sagas. Those are my go-to reads. A couple years ago, I read The House of the Spirits by Isabel Allende. Oh, it was such a beautiful story. And she also uses magical realism in her books. And it was also an epic family saga. So I think I'm really gonna like this book a lot. And this book is 383 pages. A Natural History of the Census by Diane Ackerman. This is a nonfiction book, but her famous book that she wrote was The Zookeeper's Wife, which I never read because I have a pet peeve about book titles that involve wife or daughter. It's very stream of conscious style. A lot of her musings on the senses. She just kind of brain dumps all the information she knows about it, but it's in a very like flowery, poetic style. And this book is 309 pages. It's kind of one of those books you just read a little bit, set it down, pick it up again, read a little bit more, set it down, pick it up. These kind of books usually take me a lot longer to get through because it's not like one storyline that I need to know what happens next. It's just kind of like a read it at your leisure. Garden Spells by Sarah Addison Allen. So this book is about the Waverleys, who have always been a curious family endowed with peculiar gifts that make them outsiders in their hometown of Bascom, North Carolina. Even their garden has a reputation. For the Waverley history is in the soil, and so are their futures. So it's about two sisters. One is a successful caterer in this town, and the other is a rebellious sister who fled the moment she could. But suddenly she returns with a young daughter of her own. Soon, the sisters realize they must deal with their common legacy if they are ever to feel at home in Bascom or with each other. So I'm pretty sure that I came across this book when I was looking for other books on magical realism. I just read Practical Magic and I needed to immediately read more books like that. So I think this was probably on a list of books similar to Practical Magic, and I added it to my list years ago and completely forgot about it. So now I'm excited to pick this back up and read it. This book is 286 pages and it's fairly large text with a lot of white space. So I have a feeling I'll get through this book really fast. But yes, this is Garden Spells by Sarah Addison Allen. Another book that I recently learned about is Written on the Body by Jeanette Winterson. I actually discovered this book when I was reading a review on Goodreads. For this book, someone compared her writing, Diane's writing, to Jeanette Winterson's writing, but they preferred this book. So it piqued my interest. It's at once a love story and philosophical meditation. The narrator of Written on the Body has neither name nor gender. The beloved is a married woman, and as Winterson chronicles their consuming affair, she compels us to see love, stripped of cliches and categories, as a phenomenon as visceral as blood and organs, bone and tissue, and as strange as an undiscovered continent. So this is going to be very flowery and poetic language as well. Anyways, the part about the narrator intrigued me, so I decided to give it a try. It's only 190 pages, so this could probably be a very quick read as well. A Pattern Language by Christopher Alexander. This is definitely not a read it in one sitting type of book. This is more of like a reference book, but I've been interested in reading through this book for a while. It's kind of like a philosophy book on town planning. I'm fascinated by this sort of stuff. I love architecture and buildings, and when I travel, one of my favorite things to do is observe the different architecture and the different way different towns are laid out and how people of a different culture or society will interact with those spaces and why it's different from my experiences in the US. I also love playing city building games. I played a lot of SimCity when I was younger. This manual is a whopping 1,166 pages, but it's set up in sections with some diagrams. It's arranged in a unique way where he starts bigger and then breaks things down into smaller and smaller spaces. So he'll start with the region, and then go down to a city, and then a town, and so on and so on, and then a street in a town, and then like the houses on the street or the parks on the street. And then he breaks it down into patterns, hence the title, so that you can take these ideas and apply them to your own spaces. Lincoln in the Bardo by George Saunders. I was also browsing Goodreads and this book popped up. This story unfolds in a graveyard over the course of a single night, narrated by a dazzling chorus of voices. Lincoln in the Bardo is an experience unlike any other. It takes place during the Civil War. President Lincoln's young son died of an illness at that time. From that seed of historical truth, George Saunders spins an unforgettable story of familial love and loss that breaks free of its realistic historical framework into a thrilling supernatural realm, both hilarious and terrifying. Willie Lincoln finds himself in a strange purgatory where ghosts mingle, gripe, commiserate, quarrel, and enact bizarre acts of penance. I've read a book called The Spoon River Anthology one time, and this reminds me of that book where all the ghosts are talking about how they died and how they ended up in the cemetery. And I really enjoyed that. So I'm excited to read this. I like a good ghost story. This book is 341 pages long. I also got this copy from the library. And then I have a few more on my list that I don't have physically. I'm waiting to get through these before I get the rest from the library. The Dutch House by Anne Patchett. The cover of this book caught my attention when I was browsing Goodreads. I love a good book cover. But then when I read what it was about, I was like, I have to read this book. It's about a family that lives in this lavish estate called the Dutch House. But the two main characters, a brother and a sister, are exiled from it by their stepmother. And it was described as a dark fairy tale, and I just couldn't resist. I love stories where the house plays a big role, and anything in the realm of fairy tales. I'm down. Also, I've never read anything by Anne Patchett, so I'm excited to read it this summer. And The Dutch House is 337 pages long. Another book on my list is Long Life, Honey in the Heart by Martin Prechtel. It's 392 pages. I saw this book at a friend's house and I liked the title, so I looked it up. And this is a nonfiction memoir. The author is from Guatemala. I've heard it described as a mix of magic, humor, spirituality, and it's all about Mayan culture. I love learning about other cultures and I don't often read memoirs, so it will be new and different for me, but I'm really looking forward to reading this one. Another nonfiction book on my list is Inherit the Holy Mountain, Religion and the Rise of American Environmentalism by Mark Stoll. This one's a bit longer, 424 pages. I added this book to my list because I'm a history nerd and I've got to feed my obscure areas of interest. I love learning about the more unknown facts about American history, especially like in the beginning and its formation, stuff you don't really learn in school. And I think it's important to know those stories about the US because that still lives on today. The specific topic of environmentalism really interests me, especially with all the news we hear today about the climate and environmental policy, it being such a controversial issue. I thought it would be interesting to learn how it all started and how religion played a role. Another book that I recently discovered by browsing Goodreads is Thrust by Lidia Yuknavitch. This cover, I immediately had to know what this book was about. This one's a bit of a fantasy involving time travel, which I'm always a sucker for time travel. It's probably one of my favorite sci-fi fantasy tropes. The description says it has intricately braided storylines, which I would expect nothing less of anything involving time travel. I've never heard of this author before, and I don't really know what to expect, but I'm willing to give it a try. And this book is 352 pages long. And then finally, a book that has been on my list for a long time, but it was recently brought to my attention again by Carrie from Carrie Can Read on YouTube. She recently just read this book and recommended it, but it's The Library at Mount Char by Scott Hawkins. I've read reviews where people have said if you like books about other books, then this is the one that you should read. It's also tagged as horror. It was written in 2015, and as far as I know, this is the only book this author has written. That's my list. It's 12 books and a total of 4,860 pages. It's the end of May now. I give myself from the beginning of June to the end of August. That's 92 days. So if I can read 50 pages a day, I can get through them all. And that's my summer reading list. Let me know some of the books that you've been enjoying reading in the comments. And if I can get through my list quicker than I think, then I would love to add some more books to my list. I'm always looking for recommendations and a good book to read. Clearly.